On May 4th, a building just 6 kilometers from the Kremlin was struck. This incident, deep within Moscow, brings Vladimir Putin's greatest fear into sharp focus: the possibility that Ukraine may not always be behind these drone attacks. What truly terrifies the Russian leader is the prospect of his own generals, his own oligarchs, or someone within his inner circle employing similar technology. History offers stark parallels. Egypt's Anwar Sadat was assassinated by his own army during a military parade. In ancient Rome, Julius Caesar was stabbed by his closest friends. And in Russia's own past, Tsar Paul I was strangled to death within his palace walls. Tyrants, it seems, are often struck down from within, not from without. A report prepared by a European Union intelligence agency now reveals that Putin lives in constant dread of precisely this scenario. According to the report, since March 2026, the Russian leader has been caught in a deepening spiral of paranoia. He is reportedly no longer visiting his residences in Moscow and Valdai, is not touring military facilities, and is instead hiding in modernized bunkers within the Krasnodar region. The Kremlin has attempted to explain this unusual silence by citing a heavy work schedule. State media, meanwhile, struggles to conceal the situation, routinely broadcasting footage of President Putin's meetings. However, careful observers have noted repeated outfits on different days, inconsistent background details, and some live footage that was actually recorded weeks earlier. This pattern of fake footage, hiding, and escalating paranoia, observers say, points to the potential end of a tyrant. Furthermore, intelligence reports suggest the most dangerous figure behind this potential downfall is Sergei Shoigu, the former defense minister who was once Putin's closest confidant. While coup scenarios centered on Shoigu might initially seem far-fetched, the events we are about to detail prove why Putin can no longer trust even those closest to him, revealing the stark truth behind his infamous paranoia. The specific incident that triggered this heightened state of alert occurred on December 22, 2025. Lieutenant General Fanil Sarov was assassinated in Moscow. This marked the final link in a series of attacks orchestrated by Ukraine targeting Russian military leadership, and this time, the target was deep within Russia's capital. Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov immediately recommended to President Putin that the Security Council's permanent members hold an expanded meeting to discuss the escalating situation. However, Putin opted for a more limited format. This meeting then took place on December 25th, the very day a new attack occurred at the exact location where General Sarov had been killed. The timing was no coincidence. Ukraine was clearly sending a direct message. The meeting itself produced chaos rather than unity. General Gerasimov openly accused the intelligence services of failing to detect the attacks in advance. He complained about insufficient resources for the physical protection of officers and emphasized that these assaults had created widespread disorder and anxiety within the Russian armed forces. FSB Director Alexander Bortnikov, however, went on the defensive, arguing that systematically preventing such attacks was impossible. He criticized the Ministry of Defense for lacking a dedicated special protection unit, unlike other agencies. Rosgvardia Director Viktor Zolotov, in turn, informed General Gerasimov that he could not allocate his resources to protect Defense Ministry officers, instead offering his own operational security recommendations. This response visibly angered the Chief of the General Staff. 3 security chiefs, sitting at a table, each shifting blame onto the other. This scene alone vividly illustrates the deep and growing rift within Russia's security structure. President Putin concluded the meeting with a call for calm, asking participants to submit their proposed solutions within 1 week. Following that contentious meeting, President Putin held a separate discussion with Federal Protective Service, or FSO, Director Dmitry Kochnev. A decision was made to significantly expand the list of those receiving enhanced protection. Previously, this elite protection applied only to General Gerasimov. Now, 10 high-ranking generals have been added to the list, including the Deputy Chiefs of the General Staff, GRU, Director Admiral Igor Kostyukov, the head of the National Defense Control Center, and the head of the General Staff's Main Operations Directorate. All key figures in Russia's military decision-making mechanism are now under 24-hour FSO protection. On one hand, this decision clearly demonstrated General Gerasimov's political influence, While other security agencies could not expand the FSO's scope, the Chief of the General Staff had secured it. But the real significance runs much deeper. Russia's top generals now evidently believe they cannot survive in their own capital without special protection. And these security measures are not limited to generals alone. Everyone around President Putin is now under intense surveillance. The protocols implemented by the FSO are at a state of emergency level. Staff working close to Putin are prohibited from using cell phones. Only devices without internet access are permitted. Public transportation is banned, with staff only allowed to travel in FSO vehicles. Surveillance cameras have been installed in the homes of cooks, photographers, and security personnel. Every visitor to the presidential administration undergoes a rigorous two-stage detailed security check. The list of places Putin regularly visits has been drastically shortened. Communication networks in some areas of Moscow are periodically cut off. According to important stories, an independent investigative outlet which verified this with independent sources, the FSO, not the FSB, is behind these outages. An FSB officer made a startling confession to journalists. His unit was struggling to obtain wiretapping authorization for criminal investigations because all equipment had been redirected to monitor the government and other state agencies. Russia's intelligence capabilities are now monitoring its own government, not criminals. And President Putin's concerns, it appears, are not limited to generals. The real target is much closer. This redirection of intelligence assets from criminal investigations to internal government surveillance marks a significant departure from standard state security practices. Historically, such a move signals a regime prioritizing self-preservation over public order, indicating a profound level of internal distrust that far exceeds typical concerns about external threats or common crime. According to the intelligence report, former Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu is now linked to the risk of a coup, primarily due to his significant influence within the military command structure. Shoigu and Putin's relationship spans decades. They have vacationed together, dined at the same table, and he has long been one of the most visible members of the Kremlin's inner circle. However, the course of the war in Ukraine has severely poisoned this bond. The military's failures, widespread corruption scandals, and Yevgeny Prigozhin's rebellion, which specifically targeted Shoigu, have profoundly shaken the balance of power. In May 2024, Shoigu was removed from the Ministry of Defense and transferred to the post of Secretary of the Security Council, ostensibly a promotion, but in practice, a significant curtailment of his powers. He was replaced by the technocrat Andrei Belousov. Yet, Shoigu's connections within the military remained intact, and these connections became increasingly troublesome for President Putin. In March 2026, Shoigu's former first deputy, Ruslan Salykov, was arrested on corruption charges. Before Salykov, nearly all of Shoigu's deputies had already been placed under investigation. In other words, a systematic encirclement of his network was underway. This move was widely interpreted among the elite as a violation of implicit guarantees of protection. For many years, it had been an unwritten rule that no one would touch those within Putin's inner circle. Salykov's arrest sent a chilling message that this rule no longer applied. The systematic targeting of a former defense minister's deputies, particularly one as close to Putin as Shoigu, represents a significant break from the Kremlin's established norms of elite protection. This move signals a shift from managing internal rivalries to actively dismantling power bases, suggesting a deeper level of insecurity within the leadership than previously observed, even after the Prigozhin rebellion. The report does not present concrete evidence that Shoigu was actively planning a coup, but for Putin, anxiety requires no proof. The mere presence of a sufficiently powerful figure is now perceived as an existential threat, and the Kremlin's memory on this matter remains fresh. In 2023, Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin marched his troops on Moscow, and the primary target of that rebellion was none other than Shoigu. Prigozhin had explicitly declared, "I will overthrow Shoigu." The rebellion was suppressed, and Prigozhin died in a plane crash a few months later. But the incident taught Putin a critical lesson. Someone with sufficient influence within the military can indeed threaten the system. Shoigu was the target of that rebellion. Now, he is seen as its potential source. The irony is brutal. And it was precisely in this tense atmosphere that the incident we mentioned at the beginning occurred. On the night of May 4th, a drone exploded in Moscow. The drone, which struck a building on Mosfilmovskaya Street, arrived 5 days before Victory Day. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin confirmed the incident. Video footage of the drone flying over Drozhino in the southern suburbs proved that Moscow's airspace had been successfully breached. The drone was likely shot down by air defense or electronic warfare, but even if it didn't reach its ultimate target, the message had been delivered. Physical damage was limited, but the psychological impact was massive. President Putin's greatest concern is precisely this, that his own elite might use drones to carry out an assassination. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky directly fueled this concern with a statement in Yerevan. Russia had announced a military parade on May 9th, but there would be no military equipment. This, Zelensky noted, was the first time in many years. He added that Ukrainian drones could also fly over this parade, demonstrating Russia's diminished strength. The scaling back of Victory Day has become the most visible symbol of Putin's anxiety. For the first time in 19 years, heavy military vehicles will not participate in the parade on Red Square. The Kremlin cited security as the reason for this decision, but everyone understands the real underlying cause. Access to Red Square has been blocked. Snipers and machine gunners have been positioned on the Kremlin towers, and checkpoints have been set up. And for the first time, not a single Duma deputy was invited to the ceremony. The May 9th celebrations, which Putin has long framed as the continuation of the Soviet victory over Nazism, were once the Kremlin's most powerful propaganda tool. The weakening of this tool is a clear admission that the regime can no longer confidently demonstrate its strength. And the cracks within the Kremlin are not limited to security structures. The civilian elite is also abandoning ship. At the end of April, former Deputy Minister of Natural Resources Denis Tsai fled Russia immediately after being dismissed from his post. His route was carefully planned, first to Minsk, then to Tbilisi, with his final destination being the United States. But Tsai was no ordinary bureaucrat. He had served as the general director of the state-owned company overseeing the Kremlin's national waste management reform for 6 years, and was a technocrat with direct access to the regime's inner circle. He was not on the Western sanctions list, which may have facilitated his escape. This is the first known case since 2024 of an official at this level fleeing abroad to evade investigation. Tsai's escape profoundly underscores the erosion of trust within the regime. Putin's sweeping purge operation since 2024, involving investigations, dismissals, and arrests within both the military and civilian elite, has spread the perception that no one is truly safe. The Kremlin fears that such escapes could create a domino effect, as bureaucrats facing similar investigation threats might begin to consider the same path. In Soviet history, waves of defections have consistently intensified during periods of instability. During the 1937 purges, high-ranking officials fled to the West, driven by the fear that tomorrow it will be my turn. During the chaos of Operation Barbarossa, fears that the regime would collapse triggered widespread defections. And during the ultimate collapse of the Soviet Union, hundreds of bureaucrats sought asylum abroad. Tsai's escape is now viewed as a new iteration of this historical pattern in Putin's Russia. Adding to this internal crisis is the public's silent yet palpable anger. Internet outages in Moscow, which we now know are being carried out by the FSO, are directly affecting daily life. People cannot conduct banking transactions, call taxis, or maintain business communications. Rising prices are deepening economic hardship. Dissatisfaction on social media has reached unprecedented levels, with Russians sharing their reactions via VPN despite stringent censorship. Even in official polls, which are state-controlled, Putin's approval rating has reportedly dropped from 77% to the 65% range. The actual figures are likely much lower. The monthly cost of the war, with Western estimates of nearly 30,000 casualties, is directly affecting an increasing number of families. News of funerals from impoverished ethnic republics is on the rise, yet Moscow's affluent neighborhoods remain largely untouched by this. This stark injustice is fueling a silent yet deep-seated anger. The scaling back of Victory Day celebrations adds a potent symbolic dimension to this anger. Even on Russia's holiest national day, the regime cannot demonstrate its strength. And Putin's increasingly isolated bunker life has become a vicious cycle that reinforces the perception of a weak leader. If the leader isn't seen, the people ask, why isn't he seen? If he's not appearing for security reasons, they wonder, is he really that weak? Dissenting voices are also rising. Imprisoned opposition politicians Ilya Yashin and Andrei Pivovarov are sending a clear message. This can't go on for another 10 years. So, is a coup really possible? The short answer is unlikely, but not impossible. President Putin's system is meticulously designed to prevent such an outcome. Security agencies are structured to check and balance one another. No single figure is allowed to amass enough power independently, and loyalty is constantly tested. We witnessed how Prigozhin's rebellion was ultimately absorbed and its decisive outcome. The message was clear. The suspicion surrounding Shoigu is not yet backed by concrete evidence. And some Western analysts are debating whether the intelligence report itself might be a deliberate leak, strategically aimed at dividing Russia from within. But regardless of the report's accuracy, Putin's pervasive anxiety is creating a self-perpetuating cycle. Purges breed distrust, distrust leads to desertions, and desertions trigger further purges. And news from the front lines is only accelerating this cycle. According to the Institute for the Study of War's May 2nd report, Russia lost a net 116 square kilometers of territory in April, the first monthly net loss since Kursk. The pace of advance has dropped by a factor of 4. Within the Kremlin, the question, can this war truly be won, is now being asked louder than a whisper. In this volatile environment, Putin is actively avoiding naming a successor because doing so would inevitably upset the delicate balance and accelerate the formation of rival camps. Names like Sergei Duman, Sergei Sobyanin, and Nikolai Patrushev are being closely watched, but no guarantees are being given to any of them. Furthermore, he cannot step down from power because a new leader could potentially investigate past crimes. This trap locks Putin into the path of lifetime rule. But even lifetime rule is not infinite. Putin's coughing fit in March, at the age of 73, caused a major stir. A video accidentally uploaded to the Kremlin's official channel showed severe shortness of breath. It was deleted within minutes, but the original footage had already spread widely. Swelling in his hands has fueled claims of Parkinson's disease. The Kremlin maintains his health is excellent and has reportedly allocated $26 billion to an anti-aging gene therapy project. But any sudden health crisis would instantly raise the likelihood of both a coup and a chaotic succession battle, and everyone around him knows it. The reported allocation of $26 billion to an anti-aging gene therapy project, particularly amidst a costly war, is an extraordinary expenditure for a national leader's personal health. This figure is highly unusual, even for authoritarian regimes, and suggests a desperate attempt to defy mortality, highlighting the immense personal stakes Putin perceives in maintaining his grip on power. Moreover, President Putin's key allies are closely monitoring this unfolding situation. China remains quiet but highly calculating. Beijing desires a stable Russia, as a steady flow of cheap energy, a strategic balance against the West, and a predictable partner are all firmly in China's interest. The escalating power struggle within the Kremlin directly threatens this predictability. If Putin were to leave, it is uncertain whether his successor would grant Beijing the same concessions. And uncertainty is the one thing China despises most. That is why Beijing is increasing its investment in Russia's energy assets and raw material agreements, but simultaneously loosening its political ties, a strategy of yes to money, no to a partnership of fate. China's strategic shift to increasing economic ties while loosening political ones with Russia is a calculated move, highly unusual for two nations often portrayed as aligned against the West. This pragmatic distancing indicates Beijing's deep concern over Kremlin instability, prioritizing its own long-term economic and strategic interests over ideological solidarity with a potentially volatile partner. Iran, meanwhile, is deeply worried. Tehran is heavily dependent on Russia for drone technology and military cooperation, receiving air defense systems and a nuclear protection umbrella in exchange for its Shahed drones. Putin's increasingly isolated bunker life and the purges within the Kremlin are making Iran question the reliability of its largest arms supplier. Furthermore, how much support can Russia truly provide to Iran when it cannot even protect its own refineries? North Korea appears to be the least concerned party. Kim Jong-un already lives in an isolated world and might find Putin's paranoia entirely normal. However, Pyongyang has sent thousands of troops to Ukraine and is expecting crucial technology transfers in return. Instability in the Kremlin could severely disrupt these vital transfers. India, meanwhile, is maintaining its pragmatic distance. The Modi government continues to buy cheap oil from Russia, but explicitly does not want to be tied to the chaos in the Kremlin. Every whisper of a coup strengthens Delhi's "we are neutral" stance, because aligning its fate with an unstable ally does not serve Delhi's strategic interests. And all these allies are asking the same fundamental question: what will happen to Russia if Putin leaves? There is no clear answer to this question, and this profound uncertainty is eroding Russia's international bargaining power a little more each day. Looking at the bigger picture, the situation in the Kremlin bears the classic signs of a regime's internal collapse. The leader views the threat from within his own circle as more dangerous than any external enemy. Intelligence capabilities are monitoring his own government rather than criminals. An erosion of trust among the elite is materializing in defections. Security agencies are shifting blame onto one another. The public is silent, but harboring growing anger. And the regime's most powerful symbol, the Victory Day Parade, is being scaled back due to the drone threat. Putin remains in power and retains control over the Siloviki, Russia's powerful security bloc. But Roman Anin, publisher of Important Stories, summarized the situation strikingly. This is one of the most important stories to emerge about Russia in recent times. We are witnessing the transformation of the Russian regime into a fundamentally different state. History shows that authoritarian regimes usually collapse from within, not from outside. The waves of defections, internal purges, and cycles of paranoia in Soviet history always began the same way and always ended the same way. Putin's fear isn't a coup yet, but the fear itself is already gnawing at the system from within. And these cracks in the Kremlin are becoming louder by the day.